Sometimes I think memory is just another faulty gauge in a cockpit, shaking loose after too many hard landings. I can't tell you what the weather was like on the day my first son was born, or the color of the dress my wife wore when we buried him, but I can close my eyes and still feel the exact, vibrating hum of a lathe in the Gorky automobile plant. That memory is etched in steel. Before the world caught fire, before the skies turned into a graveyard, I lived in a universe of absolute greasy logic. In Gorky, metal made sense. If a piston seized, there was a reason: heat, friction, a lack of oil. You could strip it down, diagnose the wound, and heal it. There was a comfort in that grease-stained order, a rhythm to the factory floor that sounded like a heartbeat. We built things. We didn't destroy them. I was a mechanic then, a surgeon of iron, and I believed that if you treated a machine with respect, it would never betray you. But memory plays tricks, doesn't it? It overlays that clean, industrial hum with the squelch of mud in the summer of 1943. The factory floor is gone, replaced by the Voronezh front, where the earth itself seemed to be bleeding. I was no longer Sergei the mechanic. I was Junior Lieutenant Volkov, strapped into the cockpit of a Lavochkin La-5, a fighter plane made of plywood in desperation. They called us the Falcons of the Motherland, but I felt more like a fraud in a leather helmet. I looked at the other pilots, boys with fire in their eyes, trusting their aircraft like they trusted their mothers. They climbed in, kicked the tires, and flew. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't visualize the thousands of rivets rattling in their sockets, the fuel lines prone to clogging with the slightest sediment, the fragility of the aluminum skin separating them from a fiery death. To them, the plane was a sword. To me, it was a collection of parts waiting to fail. The airfield that morning smelled of damp rot and high-octane gasoline, a chemical stench that coated the back of your throat. The rain had stopped, but the ground was a slurry of churned black soil that tried to suck the boots off your feet. I walked around my aircraft, White 14, performing a ritual that had nothing to do with military protocol and everything to do with dread. My hands, still calloused from years of wrench turning, ran over the bonded wood of the fuselage. It felt cold, clammy, like the skin of a feverish child. I checked the ailerons. I checked the rudder. I checked the landing gear struts, kicking the mud away to see the hydraulic seals. The ground crew chief, a weary man with oil permanently etched into his pores, watched me with impatience. He spat into the mud, shifting his weight. He knew I was checking his work. He knew I didn't trust him. How could I? I didn't trust the factory that built this thing, and I had worked in one just like it. I knew how tired the workers were. I knew how easily a tired man could undertorque a bolt or cross-thread a screw. Then I heard it. I was running my palm over the engine cowling, feeling for the heat of the Ash 82 radial engine, when a sound snagged my attention. It wasn't loud. It was a tiny metallic, like a coin dropped on a glass table. A thermal contraction, a settling clamp, or was it the sound of a valve spring snapping deep inside the cylinders? I froze. My hand hovered over the metal. The air around me was filled with the distant, low-frequency thrum of artillery pounding the earth miles away at Prokhorovka. A sound so constant it felt like the planet's own pulse. But that tiny, singular note of metal on metal rang in my ears, louder than the war. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the cowling, closing my eyes. I was back in Gorky for a second, listening to a lathe spin down, waiting for the anomaly. "Comrade Lieutenant," the crew chief asked, his voice sharp with irritation. "Is there a problem?" I opened my mouth to ground the plane, to say, but the words died in my throat. I looked at the other pilots climbing into their cockpits. They weren't listening for ghosts in the machine. They were looking at the sky. If I refused to fly now, based on a noise only I heard, what would they call me? A coward, a mechanic who lost his nerve. Before I could decide, the siren tore through the morning mist. It wasn't a warning. It was a scream that drilled into your skull. The field telephone in the command bunker had rung, and now the red flare was arcing over the runway, sizzling in the damp air. Scramble. The Germans were pushing hard. Bombers, hundreds of them. The indecision shattered. Instinct took over, not the pilot's instinct, but the soldier's obedience. I vaulted onto the wing, the wood slick under my boots, and slid into the cockpit. The smell of the interior hit me, sweat, leather, and the metallic tang of fear. I strapped in, my fingers fumbling with the buckles. The ground crew was already pulling the chocks. "Clear prop," I shouted, my voice sounding thin in the headphones. I primed the engine. Compressed air hissed, the propeller turned lazily once, twice, and then the engine caught. The beast awoke. The vibration rattled my teeth, shaking the instrument panel so hard the needles blurred. I scanned the gauges. Oil pressure rising. Cylinder head temperature climbing. It looked normal. It looked fine, but in my mind I could still hear that. I taxied out, the La-5 wallowing in the mud. We were taking off in pairs. To my right, Sasha, a boy from Ukraine who played the accordion, gave me a thumbs up. I couldn't return it. I gripped the throttle, feeling the vibration travel up my arm, searching for a hiccup in the rhythm. Full power. The engine roared, a deafening, physical force that slammed me back into the seat. The plane surged forward, fighting the mud. We gathered speed, the tail lifting. I was watching the RPM gauge, waiting for the needle to drop, waiting for the betrayal. Suddenly, the aircraft lurched violently to the left. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought. The left wing dipped toward the rushing mud. I was about to cartwheel into a fireball. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I didn't think. I reacted. I kicked the right rudder pedal and slammed the stick over, fighting the weight of the machine. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It was just a deep rut in the soft earth. The wheel caught, held, and then bounced free. The ground fell away. The mud turned into a blur of green and brown. I retracted the gear, and the heavy thud of the wheels locking into the wells echoed through the fuselage. We were airborne. I was alive. But as I trimmed the aircraft for the climb, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the stick. I wasn't afraid of the Germans waiting in the clouds. I was afraid of the machine wrapping itself around me like a coffin. The climb out of the airfield was a transition between worlds. We punched through a layer of low, ragged stratus clouds and emerged into the dazzling, blinding light of the upper atmosphere. This was the threshold. Below us the war was mud and blood. Up here it was light and cold and infinite. But today the sky over the Kursk salient wasn't empty. It was crowded. As we gained altitude, the horizon to the south revealed the scale of the madness. Pillars of black. Oily smoke stood like ancient columns supporting the sky, marking the burning carcasses of tanks on the steppe below. The air at 3,000 meters was thin and frigid, seeping through the gaps in the canopy, freezing the sweat on my neck. I tried to settle into the formation. We were the hunters today, or so we told ourselves. I adjusted the fuel mixture, my eyes scanning the instrument panel for the 100th time. Oil temperature stable, manifold pressure steady, but I wasn't looking with my eyes. I was listening with my skin. A pilot flies with his eyes. A mechanic flies with his ass. I could feel the combustion in the cylinders resonating through the seat. I knew the specific harmonic frequency of the Ash 82 engine. It was a rough brute of an engine, lacking the refinement of the German Mercedes or BMW powerplants, but it had a raw, angry pout. Today, though, it felt tight. The vibration was a fraction too high pitch. Or was it? I tapped the glass of the altimeter, a nervous tick. Bandits. 12 o'clock high, the radio crackled, the voice distorted by static and adrenaline. It was the squadron commander. I looked up, squinting against the sun. At first I saw nothing but the glare. Then they materialized, black specks turning into shapes, shapes turning into sharks. Messerschmitt BF 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, diving out of the sun like falcons stooping on prey. The formation broke. The orderly geometry of our flight disintegrated into chaos. A stream of tracers, bright yellow and angry, whipped past my canopy, so close I could almost smell the burning magnesium. The sky, which moments ago had been a vast, empty cathedral, was now a claustrophobic cage. Everywhere I looked, there was metal twisting, engines screaming, and the dark puffs of flak bursting like dirty cotton. I banked hard right, pulling the stick into my stomach. The G-force slammed down on me, gray curtains drawing across the edges of my vision. My face felt like it was sliding off my skull. I grunted, forcing air into my lungs, trying to keep the blood in my head. To my right, Sasha's plane, the boy with the accordion, took a hit. I didn't see the shooter. I just saw the result. His fuel tank, located just behind the cockpit, erupted. There was no explosion, just a sudden, violent expansion of orange fire that consumed the wood and fabric in a heartbeat. 1 second he was my wingman. The next he was a falling comet of debris. No parachute, no radio call. Just gone. The abstract fear of death vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This was real. I leveled out, searching for a target, searching for safety. A shadow fell over my cockpit. I craned my neck. A BF-109 was glued to my tail, its yellow nose cone looming large in my rearview mirror. He was close, too close. I could see the muzzle flashes from his nose cannons, the rhythmic pulsing of death being sent my way. Panic flared, but my hands moved with a mind of their own. I hauled the La-5 into a tight climbing turn. The German followed effortlessly. He had the energy. He had the speed. My engine groaned, the RPMs dropping as the steep angle bit into the air. I could feel the stall warning shuddering through the airframe, the buffet that tells a pilot the wings are about to stop flying. A normal pilot would have pushed the nose down to regain speed. But I knew this engine. I knew the float-type carburetor struggled under negative Gs. But under high positive load at this altitude, the mixture tended to lean out just slightly, giving a momentary surge if you feathered the throttle just right. It was a gamble, a mechanic's gamble. I pulled harder, ignoring the screaming protest of the airframe. The German pilot, expecting me to stall and spin, pulled lead to fire. At the apex of the turn, I chopped the throttle for a split second, then slammed it forward again while kicking the rudder. The engine hesitated, a terrifying gasp of silence, and then caught with a violent roar. The sudden change in drag and the burst of torque whipped the tail around. The La-5 practically stopped in midair, shuddering. The German, carrying too much speed and expecting a smooth arc, overshot. He flashed past underneath me, so close I could see the rivets on his gray wings and the black cross painted on the fuselage. He was in front of me now. The hunter had become the prey. The sensory world narrowed down to a tunnel. The deafening roar of the battle, the engines, the guns, the radio chatter, faded into a background hum. All that existed was the reticle of my gun sight and the gray shape of the Messerschmitt. I pushed the nose down, falling in behind him. My hands were steady now. The fear of the machine was gone, replaced by the cold precision of the mechanic. I was lining up a bolt hole. I was calibrating a sight. He broke left. I followed. He broke right. I anticipated it. I was inside his turn circle. The distance closed. 300 meters. 200. I thumbed the safety cover off the trigger. The Focke-Wulf, no. It was a 190 now. Another one crossing my path, an even better target, filled my sight. I had him dead to rights. I could see the pilot's head turning, realizing his mistake. "Got you," I whispered, the vibration of the plane traveling up through my spine. I squeezed the trigger. The cannons fired a short burst, recoil shaking the airframe. I adjusted slightly for the kill shot, and then the world ended. A violent shudder tore through the aircraft, far worse than the turbulence or the recoil. It felt as if a giant hand had grabbed the nose of the plane and twisted. The engine let out a sickening, grinding, followed by a series of explosive coughs. Thick, black oil splattered across my windscreen, blinding me instantly. The roar of the Ash-82 died, replaced by the terrifying, windmilling wheeze of a dying propeller. The power was gone. The stick went dead in my hand. I sat suspended in the sky, blinded by oil, surrounded by enemies, inside a machine that had finally, inevitably, kept its promise to betray me. Gravity, not aerodynamics, was now in command. The nose dropped heavy and dead, pointing straight at the scorched earth of the step front. Silence is a terrifying thing in a cockpit. It is not peaceful. It is the absence of life. It is the scream of the wind rushing over a corpse. My training manual was clear. Standard procedure for engine failure at low altitude. Bail out immediately. Do not attempt to glide. Do not attempt to repair. Survive to fly another plane. My hand went to the canopy release lever. It was the rational choice. The German fighters were circling above, wolves watching a wounded deer stumble. I could feel their eyes. I could feel the inevitable plummet. But my hand stopped. The leather glove hovered over the red handle. The pilot in me was ready to jump. The mechanic in me was furious. I listened to the windmilling propeller. It was not grinding. There was no metal-on-metal screech of a seized piston. The heart of the beast had not exploded. It had choked. It was starving. The fuel line. It had to be the fuel line. A blockage, a piece of sediment kicked up by the g-force of the turn, lodging itself like a blood clot in an artery. I was blind behind the oil-smeared glass, falling 2,000 meters a minute, with a Messerschmitt diving on my tail. I could not see the gauges. I could not see the horizon. I closed my eyes. I did not need to see. I knew the guts of this La 5 better than I knew the lines of my own palm. I had built engines like this in the freezing sheds of Gorky with numb fingers and empty bellies. I abandoned the flight stick. I let the plane fall. My hands flew across the controls, not with the finesse of an aviator, but with the violent purpose of a blacksmith. I slammed the throttle back to idle. I ripped the mixture control to full lane. I was trying to create a vacuum, a shock to the system that would suck the obstruction through. Something slammed into the tail section. Wood splintered. The airframe shuddered. The German was behind me. He was walking his fire up the fuselage. He was not waiting for me to crash. He was making sure. The canopy release lever rattled against my knee. It whispered to me. I grabbed the fuel pump switch instead. I toggled it. Once, twice, I jammed the throttle forward, flooding the carburetor, then ripped it back. I was abusing the machine, treating it with a brutality that would have failed a cadet in flight school. I was not flying. I was fighting a fist fight with a piece of iron. Another impact. Closer to the cockpit. The armor plate behind my head rang like a church bell struck by a hammer. The German was right on top of me. I had 1 second. Maybe 2. I could feel the heat of the tracers passing the canopy. I grabbed the manual primer pump. I screamed into the oxygen mask, a wordless curse at the metal surrounding me, and drove the plunger down with every ounce of strength in my arm. The response was not a roar, but a kick. The entire airframe twisted against the torque. The propeller bit into the air. The engine caught, surged, and screamed back to life, spitting blue fire and black smoke. I hauled back on the stick. The La 5, heavy with fuel and ammunition, groaned under the g-force. The oil on the windscreen streaked away in the sudden wash of the propeller, giving me a portal of clear glass. The German pilot had expected a corpse. He had flown close, arrogant, his guard down, watching the show. He was directly in front of me, filling the window, his belly exposed. I did not aim. I simply squeezed. My cannons unloaded everything that was left. The Messerschmitt disintegrated. It did not spiral. It simply ceased to be a flying machine and became a cloud of debris. I flew through the smoke of his destruction, the engine howling a song of pure, unadulterated violence. I did not celebrate. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the stick. The flight back to the airfield was a blur of jagged nerves and a sputtering engine that threatened to die again with every drop in manifold pressure. I put her down on the grass strip hard, bouncing twice, the landing gear screaming in protest. When the prop finally stopped turning, I did not climb out. I fell out. I lay on the grass, smelling the crushed clover and the burning oil, looking up at the indifferent blue sky. Years later, people would ask me about the war. They would ask about the medals, the kills, the glory of the Guards regiment. I would show them my hands. I am an old man now. I spend my days in a small workshop, fixing bicycles, toasters, things that do not matter. I hold a wrench and I feel the weight of it. It is cold. It is indifferent. In the war, they told us the machine was an extension of our will. They lied. The machine is a traitor. It waits for you to relax, for you to trust it, and then it tries to kill you. I learned that day that you do not partner with steel. You dominate it. You force it to work until it breaks, or until you do. I look at the tractors in the collective fields sometimes, rusting in the rain. I see the young men driving them, careless, listening to the radio. They think the harvest is guaranteed. They do not know that the gears are grinding, waiting for the moment to snap. The harvest is never safe. The machine is broken forever. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.